So how does that work? I saw this in the report. There are two main pathways, one for a high ambition and one for lower ambition. Um, how does that work then? Are you going to set out now and say, right, we are on the highest ambitious pathway, or are we just going to make the changes and see where that ends up?
Both pathways end up with carbon net neutrality in 2050. One sets off at a higher pace, as it were. The other one sets off at a slower pace, but has to catch up at a later date.
So which do we choose?
I suspect there'll be a combination of the two when we look at the practicalities of replacing our energy source with renewables. And as we see technology, and people talk about over-reliance on technology, but technology is moving very quickly. For instance, battery power, they're coming out with a new battery type fairly shortly, which is now fairly practical, which will extend lithium ion. The new batteries will be 5 times better, so that'll extend the electric vehicle range, and obviously has a lot of other applications in energy storage.
So how do you measure the levels of climate change which are being levels of carbon dioxide which are being emitted?
Well, there are international reporting standards, and we subscribe to those. Sadly, they work around 18 months to 2 years in arrears because we have to report all our hydrocarbon use, etc., in a standard format, and then this is then number crunched and comes back to us and tells us where we are in terms of our net emissions.
So what happens if we don't meet the targets?
Well, that's one of the things we're working on at the moment. We're putting together a climate change bill, and that should be before Parliament by the end of this parliamentary term, or session, I should say. And that will lay out statutory targets and enabling legislation to make sure that we do hit those targets.
So if we don't, it's not like a big hammer's going to come down or something, you know. Sorry, I've picked a random example. But it's all just it's written into statute. Is that right?
Well, yes, it will be a form of law and an obligation. Obviously, we can't commit other administrations, future administrations. The bill will tend to do that, and they will obviously have to revisit in parliamentary terms if they wish to change that bill.
What was the main aim of the Curran report?
It was to address carbon neutrality by a date that would be practical in terms of what we can achieve as a nation.
And has it achieved that?
I think it has. I think it's a very good report, and having looked at it, the appendices run to several hundred pages, and the analytical detail behind that is very thorough. I think it's a report that we can work with. It's an action plan that we can really deliver on, and that's a key issue here, delivery. It's all very well putting things down on paper, making a report here and a report there, but the practical delivery is what it's all about.
So when are we going to start to see this delivery?
Well, delivery's already started in some ways, and from my department's point of view, we've recently revisited our building regs, and both in residential and commercial terms. We've recently looked at and our agricultural development scheme, which is agricultural support on the island. There's now an environmental aspect to that and incentivisation. At this moment in time, we're looking at more woodland planting, peat restoration. That will be starting almost straight away, 1,000 acres of peat restoration. We're going to ban peat cutting. There's lots of things going on behind the scenes.
Did this report tell us anything we didn't already know?
I guess it did. It probably didn't, in as much that we know that we've got to do certain things to do it, but what it has done is put it in context in terms of how we get there and the pathways that we might use. So it's a very useful report, and I think it's one that we will be able to refer to and work with, and it's a living report. The action plan, or should I say the action plan that's derived from the report, is a living action plan. Professor Curran admits that nothing's set in stone at the moment. Technology will move on, and we may be net benefactors of that in due course. It's the old conundrum, electric vehicles look very good at the moment. They're certainly excellent for the island, but if we can get biogas or hydrogen, maybe existing gas networks and what have you will remain viable going into the future.
So is your department going to put in place schemes to make it easier for people, and I'm talking people of all ages, to contribute to reducing their carbon emissions?
Well, I think we can show people the way in their personal lives. It's down to them. We don't want to order people to do things,
But I'm talking about things like electric cars. So in the UK, you can get a subsidy if you towards the purchase of an electric car. Is that the type of thing you would look to bring in?
well, I don't think Professor Curran really recommended that. I think most cars that are bought in the Isle of Man are second-hand and probably have already received a subsidy at some stage. But I think most of the things that we're talking about are things that people will want to do because I've got an electric vehicle. I bought it 5 months ago, and it's saving me money. I feel good that it's not polluting, and it's a good car to drive.
Yeah.
And
Well, but it's not. It would be a lie to say that whenever anyone now is buying a new car, that not everyone is going for electric. You know, should there not be something in place to encourage people to buy electric?
well, at the moment, electric cars attract no road tax. They are cheaper to run. A lot cheaper to run. I would say that I look at my equivalent car burning petrol or diesel, it's probably costing me about 50 to 60% of that to run per mile. So that's an incentive. And I think the public generally will buy into a lot of things if it benefits them. For instance, if you look at home insulation and things like that, you get a warmer home, a more comfortable home, and it saves you money. And these are the sort of incentives that, with new builds, for instance, we're going to be nearly passive house standards by the mid-20s. You move into a near passive house, you don't spend much money on heating at all.